I'll be one of your co-MCs today alongside Margaret Elizabeth of the Green Party, and we're just so incredibly excited here to be joined by impressive organizers who have helped build for this event, including the Green Party, Chris Hedges, Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, also known as CAUSE, Do Dissidents, Revolutionary Blackout Network, Status Quo, union members from SEIU, IBU, UAW, and more. And of course, many who are not yet part of an organization, but arrived ready to organize and win. That I'm here because I know that we can win, and I feel confident in that fact because I've seen it. I was excited to help found Workers Strike Back in 2023, to build on the strategy that has yielded so many incredible victories, like the Seattle minimum wage that was $15 when we won it and is now over $20 an hour. That was like the Amazon tax, where we taxed Amazon and big business over $250 million per year to fund affordable housing. These are the kinds of transformative victories that are urgently necessary to turn the tide. During those fights, I saw how in a city with no elected Republicans, Democrats played an open role of subservience to big business, obstructing our movements. And when we did force their hand so that they had to vote yes on what we were fighting for, they fought to water down our victories at every single opportunity. The Democratic Party is not an ally to left-wing movements. When Kshama Sawant left office, those same Democrats rapidly moved to water down our $15 an hour minimum wage law last year. They wanted to use inflation as a reason to permanently enshrine a second lower tier among minimum wage workers, as though it's workers and not the bosses who should absorb those costs. It was absolutely shocking. And Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers led the charge in stopping that attack, turning out to City Hall, and stopping it in its tracks. As of January this year, every single Seattle minimum wage worker makes $20.76 an hour. And that's what we're all here today to discuss. How can we continue to build on that fighting strategy that engages the strength of working class and young people? Because we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized, and refuses to make backroom deals with the two parties of the billionaires. How can we fight the rich and their two parties and win? So we're starting off with a bang. Our first speaker, it's my honor to introduce former Seattle City Council member and socialist Kshama Sawant is a founding member of Workers Strike Back and also a member of Revolutionary Workers. She led the fight for the $15 an hour minimum wage that is now over $20 an hour here in Seattle. She has never backed down or taken a backroom deal in her 10 years in office. She only accepted the average wage of a worker that she represented, donating the rest to social movements. And unfortunately, that is an incredibly rare track record. It's the only one I know of. And so it's my honor, to introduce someone who used their elected position to organize working class struggle. And she's going to talk to us about how to fight the rich and what we're here to do today.
Good morning, everyone, both people who are here in person and watching over live stream. The billionaires and their system are in crisis. Political parties around the world, parties that represent the elite, are facing revolt after revolt from working people. Last year in the elections of all 10 leading industrialized nations, the incumbents were either booted out or lost a big share of the vote. This was the first time this has ever happened in almost 120 years of records. Here in the US, the approval rating of the former incumbent Democratic Party is currently in the rubbish heap. Nearly half of registered Democratic Party voters disapprove of them. And overall, only 21% approve of how Democrats in Congress are handling themselves in the present crisis. The revolt of working people against the establishment is fundamentally about the bankruptcy of capitalism and its representatives. The cost of living crisis, the skyrocketing rents, the undermining of the public services working people rely on, the death of the American dream. Working people are fed up with going broke just to buy groceries or pay their rent. Meanwhile, wealth continues to be rapidly amassed at the top. Amidst our desperate struggle for survival, last year saw the world's 5 richest billionaires increase their wealth by $542 billion. Elon Musk, Trump's current favorite billionaire, has $500 billion in wealth. This revolt against the Democratic Party does not mean working people are giving Trump permission to run roughshod over them either. It is true that a section of the working class has illusions that Trump is their guy, and this raises a crucial strategy question for us. How do we win those working people over to a fight back? Because we have seen that on issue after issue, whether it is raising the minimum wage or taxing the rich or Medicare for all or ending the genocide in Gaza, American working people are more progressive than ever before. Unfortunately, alongside the fury of working people, the most prominent feature of this political moment is the near total vacuum of clear leadership on the left and in the labor movement. There is a profound shortage of leaders prepared to break with the political parties of the rich. We've seen betrayals one after another of these so-called progressives. Bernie Sanders, AOC and the Squad, and progressive labor leaders like Sean Fain. Both Bernie and AOC played a central role in bringing Trump to power. They uncritically supported Biden and then rushed to endorse Harris. They abandoned Medicare for all. They abandoned the fight for a $15 minimum wage. They could have organized mass rallies on either of those demands and put massive pressure on both parties and built a new party in the process. Instead, they put a premium on their peaceful relations with the elite, squandered a historic opportunity, and carried out a historic betrayal. There is a meme going around of Bernie Sanders' action figure that has a stamp on it saying sold out. I'm not sure if there's one for AOC. In any case, that meme is the epitaph of the Bernie movement. Sadly, it was a predictable ending. I, like many of you, was part of Sanders' movement, and we were correct to be because millions were coming together, but some of us did so with our eyes open. From the beginning, myself and the socialists who are part of revolutionary workers today noted the fundamental mistake of funneling people into the Democratic Party. We warned about the dead-end nature of this strategy of a political revolution against the billionaire class from inside a party that is owned lock, stock, and barrel by that same billionaire class. We need a new mass party for the working class and the oppressed. The organizations here, like Workers Strike Back, the Green Party, and all of us, we have an important role to play in that process. But that will not happen so long as lesser evilism rules the day and until the utterly failed strategy of voting for one billionaire party so that another billionaire party can win is abandoned. We need to build an organized, unified movement of working people to systematically take on the rich who run society and undermine their ability to rule. So we need to return to the basics, and we need to get something straight. First, this system does not belong to us. Capitalism is a system of rule by the rich and solely for the rich. It is based on stealing the wealth you and I create through our labor, as Karl Marx explained 175 years ago. Or, as the late George Carlin said somewhat more recently, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Second, the main reason this tiny sliver of society, the billionaires, the capitalist class, are able to own more wealth than a large majority of the world's population, more than billions, the only reason they can make us work long hours and live off crumbs while they amass untold wealth is by dividing working people, the overwhelming majority of society. To overcome that, we need to be clear about some things. By far, the most important division in society is between the capitalists and the rest of us. Between them, the rich, and the immense majority of us who struggle to survive. To succeed, we need to be clear about who our friends are and who our enemies are. Our enemies are the billionaires and the bosses, the capitalist class, their institutions, their political parties, and also their more treacherous spokespeople who sometimes appear and sound like they support workers, but really act as pressure release valves and gatekeepers. Our enemies are not other working class or middle class or poor people. They are not immigrants or tech workers or workers in the South. Or Muslims, or trans people, or ordinary Republican or Democratic voters, or independent voters, or non-voters. Our enemies are those who make billions, or even millions of dollars a year, own the politicians, own the land and the resources, and who call the shots in the system. Our enemies are also those who justify and protect the interests of the rich. And because we outnumber them 1,000,000 times over, they need to invent 1,000,000 ways to divide us. They use nationalism and xenophobia. They tell us that workers in other countries, whether China or Russia or immigrants from Mexico, they tell us they are our enemy. This is one of Trump and the Republican Party's favorites. They use identity politics, which is favored by the Democratic Party. Identity politics is a systematic weapon used by the ruling class to stoke division between white workers and non-white workers, between workers based on gender, sexual orientation, and nationality, between workers with college education and millions of other workers whom Hillary Clinton insultingly called the basket of deplorables and Biden more recently called garbage. We need to be clear about the difference between identity politics and the fight against oppression. Identity politics is corrosive to working class solidarity. But it is the responsibility of all of us in the working class to fight together against all oppression. Against racism, sexism, transphobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and every other kind of prejudice. Because if we don't, we are just playing into the boss's ploy to divide us and use that division to keep us all at low wages with poor standards of living and afraid to fight while they rake it in. Some of the most important victories we won through my Socialist City Council office were on issues of oppression, and those victories helped to build for other victories. The Amazon tax itself would not have been won had we not won the support of the rank and file of the Black Lives Matter movement during the George Floyd rebellion in 2020 to defeat Jeff Bezos to win hundreds of millions every year in big business taxes to fund affordable social housing. Our Amazon tax raised $450 million last year alone. Some people will ask, shouldn't we be running a lot of candidates for office? We do need to prepare the ground for a mass party of working people. But speaking as a former elected representative of working people myself, my answer to that question will be no, not right now. Not right now is not when we can run lots of candidates for office. Our movement at present is not strong enough to run significant numbers of candidates. Elections are also not the main way that change happens. People with progressive ideas get elected all the time, but without a strong movement behind them, they get absorbed into the system. They capitulate to the enormous pressures from the rich and their politicians. And it might seem ironic to you all that I'm saying this as somebody who has a decade-long track record of having used elected office in the correct way, but I say this because, tragically, that is the only example we can point out in our times of elected office being used in that way. So yes, it can be done, it needs to be done that way, but a sober assessment also is that it hasn't been done otherwise outside Seattle. We need to build a stronger movement now through other campaigns and struggles to prepare the ground to be able to run candidates independent of the two parties of the billionaires. Members of our movement who do want to run for office need to be accountable to working people from the outset. They should work with the Fight the Rich campaign on developing a strong working class political platform. They would need to run any such campaign on a clear fighting working class basis and agree to accept only the average worker's wage if elected, as I did during my entire decade in City Hall. And this is another point of confusion. And while it is the bare minimum that elected representatives should do, it is not enough for them to take pro-working class votes on legislation that is in front of them. That is not enough. They need to commit themselves, as I did, to a movement-building approach, to use their office to initiate and support campaigns on bold, far-reaching demands, and even though it will alienate and infuriate both Democratic and Republican politicians. And I'll tell you a rule of thumb is if you aren't infuriating the Democratic and Republican politicians, you're doing something deeply wrong. We need to take the reins of society away from the capitalists. All of our fights right now, the small ones and the big ones, have to be towards that end. I am a member of Workers Strike Back, and I am also a member, like Emily, of Revolutionary Workers, a revolutionary socialist organization. If you, like me, agree that capitalism cannot be reformed, that it needs to be replaced by a global system of solidarity and sustainability and democracy, then you should consider joining Revolutionary Workers, Solidarity.
Many accolades could try to describe our next speaker. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, but most importantly in my estimation has been his fierce independence and honesty. For 4 decades, he's refused to silence ugly truths and recognizing that for-profit newspapers run by billionaires and even public news outlets which are independent on corporate sponsors will never be willing to expose those same corporate sponsors. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris Hedges to the stage.
Thank you. For several decades, I and a handful of others, Sheldon Wolin, Noam Chomsky, John Burns Johnson, Cornel West, Barbara Ehrenreich, Ralph Nader, and of course Jill Stein and Kshama Sawant, warned that the expanding social inequality and capture of our democratic institutions, including the media, the Congress, organized labor, academia, and the courts by corporations and oligarchs would inevitably lead to an authoritarian and finally Christian fascist state. My books, American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle, Death of the Liberal Class, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, written with Joe Sacco, Wages of Rebellion, and America the Farewell Tour were a succession of impassioned pleas to take the decay seriously. But I take no joy in being correct. The rage of those abandoned by the economy, the fears and concerns of a beleaguered and insecure middle class, and the numbing isolation that comes with the loss of community will be the kindling for a dangerous mass movement, I wrote in American Fascists in 2007. If these dispossessed are not reincorporated into mainstream society, if they eventually lose all hope of finding good, stable jobs and opportunities for themselves and their children, in short, the promise of a brighter future, the specter of American fascism will beset the nation. This despair, this loss of hope, this denial of a future leads the desperate into the arms of those who promise miracles and dreams of apocalyptic glory. Donald Trump does not herald the collapse of democracy. He heralds the ripping away of the veneer that masks the rot within the ruling structures and their pretense of democracy. He is the symptom, not the disease. The loss of basic democratic norms began long before Trump. Deindustrialization, deregulation, austerity, unchecked predatory corporations, including the healthcare industry, wholesale surveillance of every American, social inequality, an electoral system defined by legalized bribery, endless and futile wars, the largest prison population in the world, and the feelings of betrayal, stagnation, and despair, combined in a toxic brew that has culminated in inchoate and justified hatred of the ruling class. And the Democrats are as guilty as the Republicans. The political philosopher Sheldon Wolin called our system of governance inverted totalitarianism, one that kept the old iconography, language, symbols, but had handed the internal levers of power to corporations and the rich. Now we are shifting to totalitarian's more recognizable form, one dominated by a demagogue and an ideology grounded in our homegrown Christian fascism. We live in a two-tiered legal system, one where poor people are harassed, arrested, and jailed for absurd infractions, such as selling loose cigarettes, which led to Eric Garner being choked to death by the New York City police in 2014, while crimes of appalling magnitude by the oligarchs and corporations, from oil spills to bank fraud in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which wiped out 40% of the world's wealth, are dealt with through tepid administrative controls, symbolic fines, and civil enforcement that give these wealthy perpetrators immunity from criminal prosecution, I wrote in America the Farewell Tour. The utopian ideology of neoliberalism and global capitalism is a vast con, a mechanism to funnel wealth upwards to the billionaire class. The working poor, whose unions and rights were stripped from them and whose wages have stagnated or declined over the past 40 years, have been disempowered and impoverished. Their lives, as Barbara Ehrenreich chronicled in Nickel and Dimed, are one long, stress-ridden emergency. The middle class is evaporating. Cities that once manufactured products and offered factory jobs are boarded up wastelands. The destruction is a ruse. Corporations, the destruction of trade barriers is a ruse corporations and the billionaire class use to stash $1.42 trillion in profits in overseas banks to avoid paying taxes. The labels liberal and conservative are meaningless, evidenced by a Democratic presidential candidate who turned to Wall Street bankers to formulate her economic policies and bragged about an endorsement from Dick Cheney, a war criminal who left office with a 13% approval rating. Fascism is always the bastard child of a bankrupt liberalism. The attraction of Trump is that, although vile and buffoonish, he mocks the political charade. Trump lies like he breathes, but the lies told by the two establishment parties caused far more pain and did far more damage than the lies told by Trump. Trump is merely the apotheosis of a culture of mendacity, deception, and exploitation, for we are a culture awash in lies. It no longer matters what is true, it matters only what is correct. The correct ideology of neoliberalism is as delusional as the correct ideology of the Christian fascists. Neither are reality-based belief systems. My book, Empire of Illusion, begins in Madison Square Garden at a World Wrestling Entertainment Tour. I understood that professional wrestling was the template for our social and political life, but I did not know that it would produce a president, and soon a secretary of education, who has vowed to shut the department down. The bouts are stylized rituals I wrote in what could have been a description of a Trump rally. They are public expressions of pain and a fervent longing for revenge, the lurid and detailed sagas behind each bout, rather than the wrestling matches themselves, are what drive crowds to a frenzy. These ritualized battles give those packed in the arenas a temporary, heady release from mundane lives. The burden of real problems is transformed into fodder for a high-energy pantomime. It is not going to get better. The tools to shut down dissent have been cemented into place. Our democracy cratered years ago. All Trump has to do to establish a naked police state is flip a switch, and he will. The worse reality becomes, the less a beleaguered population wants to hear about it, I wrote at the conclusion of Empire of Illusion, and the more it distracts itself with squalid pseudo-events of celebrity breakdowns, gossip, and trivia. These are the debauched revels of a dying civilization. The system is not reformable. Either we obstruct in the only form left to us, which is mass mobilization, acts of sustained civil disobedience, especially the strike, or we are frog-marched into serfdom. To be innocent now in the eyes of the state is to be guilty. It is to be complicit in this radical evil. It is to bear the mark of Cain. It is to do nothing, to defend the weak, the oppressed, the poor, and those who suffer, and to protect the planet. Choose, but choose fast. Time is running out. The sick, unable to afford care, are dying. The poor, especially children, are going hungry. Families, along with the mentally ill, are thrown into our streets. The unemployed and underemployed are desperate. Schools are being defunded and privatized. Our prisons are packed. The undocumented are being hunted down, imprisoned, and deported. Our roads, bridges, dams, levees, power grids, rail lines, subways, bus services are crumbling. The ecosystem is disintegrating as temperatures rise and freak weather patterns, wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, flooding, tornadoes, melting polar ice caps and glaciers drive desperate migrants northwards from the global south. This is the dystopia the ruling global class, the ruling capitalists, are shoving down our throats. No social or revolutionary movement succeeds without a core of people who will not betray their vision and their principles. In other words, like all of us here, militants. And liberals plead with us to believe in the ultimate goodness of the ruling class, the fantasy that justice and social equality can be achieved through their bankrupt institutions, including the Democratic Party, even though, like Herod of old, they repeatedly sell us out. We are castigated for our anger, our alienation from the centers of power, and our bleakness. We are told to adopt a positive attitude, to trust the system, that we can awaken the dead consciences of the atrophied souls, the plutocrats running Amazon, Halliburton, Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, and Citibank, and the two ruling parties. I cannot count how many times I have been told this. But this is the road to despair, not hope. Hope comes when we physically defy those in power. Those who succumb to apathy or complicity are enemies of hope, and they become in their passivity agents of injustice. Hope has a cost. Hope is not comfortable or easy. Hope requires personal risk. Hope does not come with the right attitude. Hope is not about peace of mind. Hope is action. Hope is doing something. The more futile, the more useless, the more irrelevant and incomprehensible an act of rebellion is, the vaster and more potent hope becomes. Hope never makes sense. Hope is absurd. Hope knows that an injustice visited on our neighbor is an injustice visited on us all. Hope posits that people are drawn to the good by the good. And this is the secret of hope's power. It is why it can never finally be defeated. Hope demands for others what we demand for ourselves. Hope does not separate us from them. Hope sees in our neighbor, even our enemy, our own face. And the powerful do not understand hope. Hope is not part of their vocabulary. They speak in the cold, dead words of national security, global markets, electoral strategy, staying on message, image, and profits. The powerful protect their own. They divide the world into the damned and the blessed, the patriots and the traitors, the rich and the poor. They insist that extinguishing lives in foreign wars or in our prison complexes is a form of human progress. They cannot see that the suffering of a child in Gaza or a child in the blighted pockets of Washington, D.C. diminishes and impoverishes us all. They are deaf, dumb, and blind to hope. Those addicted to power, consumed by self-exaltation, cannot decipher the words of hope any more than most of us can decipher hieroglyphics. Hope to Wall Street bankers and politicians, to the masters of war and commerce, is not practical, it is gibberish, it means nothing. I cannot promise you it will be easy. I cannot assure you that tens of thousands will join us. I cannot pretend that going to jail is pleasant. I cannot say that anyone in Congress, anyone in the boardrooms of the corporations that cannibalize our nation, anyone in the press will be moved to pity, to act for the common good. I cannot tell you these wars will end or the hungry will be fed. I cannot say that justice will roll down like a mighty wave and restore our nation to sanity. But I can say this: if we resist and carry out acts, no matter how small, of open defiance, hope will not be extinguished. We cannot be naive. It will be difficult, costly, and painful, but this confrontation is our only hope. Otherwise, we and the planet that sustains us are doomed. And I concede, we may not succeed. So be it. At least those who come after us, and I speak as a father, will say we tried. The corporate forces that have us in their death grip will destroy the lives of my children. They will destroy the lives of your children. They will destroy the ecosystem that makes life possible, and we owe it to those who come after us not to be complicit in this evil. We owe it to them to refuse to be good Germans. This is a battle, quite literally, between freedom and slavery, between life and death. It is that grave. And it is a battle that no matter the odds, we must fight. But in the end, I do not fight fascists because I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. Thank you.
So our next speaker, it's my great honor to introduce. She's a longtime Green Party member, and she has run unambiguously pro-worker, anti-war presidential campaigns, especially last year against both Trump and Harris. She stood strong against years of slander by corporate media, by Democratic Party hacks. They're constantly wondering, where is Jill Stein? Well, I am excited to tell all of you here today that she's here to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you all so very much. It is really a joy to be here. It is a joy to hear what everyone is saying. And it is a joy to be a part of this movement. I come here a little bit under the weather, as some of you may know, having had a bad case of the flu a couple weeks ago and then some asthma triggered by that flu. And I almost didn't come, feeling like there was no way I could actually prepare for this amazing summit. But at the end, I decided I needed to come just to be here, just to bear witness, just because this is what democracy looks like, and this is how we fight back. And if we come away from today with nothing more than the commitment to stay together, to be together, to know that what we did in the last election was not just okay, it was absolutely essential. It was world-saving. It is the way forward. This is what we must do. And the fact that they continue to blame us and to try to, to smear us for having challenged empire and oligarchy and genocide, the fact that they will not let up is absolutely the affirmation of our lasting impact and the fact that we must keep up this fight. In our minds, it's really important to invert the smears when they come at you. It should be an affirmation. It should be seen as a badge of honor. It should be seen as a confirmation that what we do absolutely matters. So I say, bring it on. Keep those smears coming. Keep us relevant. So we are very much here, and I want to thank everyone here virtually and in the room who's here to take back power from the billionaires and their two parties that serve them, and to put power into the hands of working people. So we continue the momentum of our pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency to demand an America and a world that works for working people, which is the only world that works for all of us. And it's important to know that that world in many ways is closer than it has ever been, because empire and oligarchy are indeed unraveling right now before our very eyes. They are collapsing in front of us. Empire is falling, we are rising, and this is unstoppable. So it's really critical, above all, to reject the propaganda that tells us that we are powerless, that resistance is futile. So many of us right now, a recent poll, even before the shit started hitting the fan, something like 72% of Americans were tuning out of politics in the wake of the last election, the 24 election. 72%, according to polls, are tuning out because politics has become so toxic, so distasteful. And that is true, but it cannot stop there. We have to seize the moment. This is that perfect storm for speaking to the vast majority of Americans right now who are in revolt. They've just been denied a framework in which to unite that revolt. And that is what we are doing here today and with this Workers' Strike Back movement. So I encourage everyone to become a part of it if you are not already. This is a meltdown of empire, a meltdown of duopoly, and it is on the verge of that transformation to a people-powered politics. This is the American public, where, where 68% of Americans, last they asked, wanted an immediate ceasefire and an end to the genocide, where over 60% want a shutdown of all military aid to Israel. This is astounding. This is not so much a problem of a misinformed public. This is a problem of a public which is denied representation. We have an anti-democratic government, is what we have, both political parties. And as said earlier, Trump is a symptom. He is not the disease itself. He is part of the disease, but he is not the driver of that disease. He is a symptom of it. That disease is wreaking havoc on every dimension of our lives. It was, some months ago, it was said to be over 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. Well, now that is over 2/3. It's now over 66% of Americans. Over half of Americans are now struggling to pay their rent, paying more than 30 or even 50% of their monthly income just to keep a roof over their heads. Meanwhile, the rate of homelessness is absolutely unprecedented. Last year, the number of homeless increased by 18% in 1 year alone. That's on top of a 12% increase the year before. 100 million people are strapped in medical debt, 44 million in student debt. Half of youth say that they are hopeless about the future. 1 in 4 have considered harming themselves within 2 weeks of the poll alone because of how desperate they are about the condition of their lives. This says really more than anything that what is being imposed on us by the parties of oligarchy, by the corporate duopoly, is absolutely unsustainable, unforgivable, and it will not stand. Do not let this emergency be hijacked, because that is what they are trying to do right now. That is what Bernie Sanders is doing. That is what AOC is doing. That's what all of them are doing, is saying, see, look how bad Trump is, put us back in power. But what exactly are they doing? What they're doing, I think, is best summarized by Hakeem Jeffries, if you saw the clip of him that went viral, asking, well, what is it we can do? I'm trying to figure out what we can do. It's their government. That is the problem. It's not their government, it's our government. And we need to throw all the bums out. We need to organize, we need to prepare for the general strike, and we need to run them out of office. Thank you all so very much. I look forward to working together Our work has only just begun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a fantastic speech. I'd like to welcome next to the stage Gray Martin, who is a Harborview healthcare worker. They recently spoke to the 3,000-person rally that turned out in solidarity with federal workers facing major attacks from Trump and Elon Musk. And they are a member of Workers Strike Back as well. Thank you.
My name is Gray Martin. I am a healthcare worker and a rank-and-file member of Washington Federal State Employees Union Local 3488. The billionaire in the White House, Donald Trump, along with Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, are currently carrying out an anti-worker blitz across the federal government. Roughly 75,000 federal workers have taken a buyout that Trump and Musk have offered to get them to leave against the advice of our unions, and over 10,000 federal workers have already been fired by this administration. This equals about 3% of the 2.3 million person civilian workforce. Trump and Musk cuts to government agencies and programs aren't about targeting fraud or waste. It's an attack on workers and our meager protections, including cuts at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Hospitals and trauma centers like my own are largely funded through Medicare and Medicaid, which provides necessary health care for millions of Americans. These cuts are making the already barbaric healthcare system in this country even worse. Meanwhile, the Democrats have done nothing to fight back. In fact, many of them have joined in on Trump's attacks. This is after Democrats paved the way for Trump's victory in the first place with their betrayals and attacks on working people. Democrats broke the railroad workers' strike. They failed to fight for a $15 minimum wage. They refused to fight for Medicare for all. And they spent billions to fund the genocide in Gaza. It's that endless barrage of attacks and betrayals that has brought us to this point. Workers keep the economy and government running, not the billionaire class, which exploits our labor to make their profit. Workers' power lies in being organized, willing to strike and to withhold our labor. The threat of strike action is our most important weapon to force these billionaire-backed parties and wealthy elite to act and to secure victories for the working class. In 2019, during Trump's government shutdown, unionized air traffic controllers and flight attendants threatened strike action that forced Trump to end the shutdown within hours of the strike being called. Federal workers can stop Trump's anti-worker attacks and fight for more, including real raises to make up for years of massive inflation. We need to go on the offensive with a fighting strategy for what workers need, including a renewed fight for Medicare for all, including ballot initiatives for public health care at the local and state level. And we cannot rely on the failed strategy of the vast majority of the union leadership who endorsed the strikebreakers Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris. We have to rebuild a fighting labor movement, which means rejecting the approach of the business unionist leaders, including the heads of the federal government unions like my union, AFSCME, who have failed to organize strike action in response to Trump's attacks. We need a class struggle approach, and that requires reckoning inside the labor movement and the building up of a new, militant, rank-and-file leadership, including a socialist leadership that understands that we need to break with capitalism itself. We cannot allow the Democrats to pose as the resistance against Trump. And we cannot allow sellouts like Bernie Sanders to lead working people back into the billionaire-backed party that financed a genocide. Shame indeed, while they attacked the free speech of anti-war activists in our schools and workplaces, only now are they willing to criticize the Israeli government. They financed this genocide. They do not deserve our support. They are not the resistance to what is happening. There is no reforming this capitalist party hell-bent on imperialism and war. A union is the best tool and protection that a worker has of being engaged in struggle to fight for change in the workplace and in the country as a whole. Workers' Strike Back members have successfully filed union resolutions in their unions, rallied support for Amazon workers fighting to unionize in various facilities, and we need to build a powerful movement to fight for what we need, including Medicare for all, and an end to Trump's anti-worker attacks and good union jobs for all. Thank you. Thank you. I encourage you to join us at Workers' Strike Back. Join the movement. Fight the rich in their two parties. When we fight, when we fight, when we fight, solidarity.
His name is Logan Swan. He's a rank and file member of Ironworkers Local 86, and he played a leading role, an elected role on the Tax Amazon Organizing Committee, and he's going to touch on some of those lessons today.
Logan Swan, I'm a member of Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers, as well as a journeyman iron worker and a longshore casual. So while we're born into our class position, nobody's born a revolutionary. Like everyone, I joined this movement with some confused and backwards politics. Coming of age and entering the workforce during recession, in the absence of political leadership from labor leaders. During that crisis, I drew the conclusion that we don't have jobs because of outsourcing through things like NAFTA and so on. So that if we wanted to see a return of like good union jobs, people like me had to buy union-made, American-made. I didn't get a smartphone until Motorola had one, I think, made in Texas. I bought Union Line jeans, Union House boxer briefs, a Ricker vacuum, a Ricker vacuum made in Missouri. If I couldn't find something made in the U.S., I would hit a thrift store or I'd go without it. And mind you, at the time I was a non-union steelworker. I made $12.40 an hour. I lived in low-income housing. It fucking sucked. So this changed nothing. The ruling class doesn't care about these kinds of individual choices. It wasn't yet clear to me that those good union jobs that people talk about were owed to the legacy of class struggle of the labor movement. And that the degeneration of our condition was due to the class collaboration and the political cowardice of the leaders of our unions. Their cynical pragmatism of accepting the limitations imposed by the Republicans and Democrats, the absolute minimum our employers would concede to in contract negotiations. I started organizing as a socialist at the same time that I began my apprenticeship in the building trades as an iron worker. The experiences of organizing in the successful 15 Now campaign, fighting to tax Amazon to create union jobs, building affordable public-owned housing, were part of my apprenticeship, but unfortunately not as a rank-and-file union member, but as a socialist. I was radicalized and tempered by the society we lived in with all of its contradictions and injustices. So I'm going to focus on tax Amazon and the lessons from that struggle. And we campaigned on legislation to create 10,000 union building trades jobs, not building shiny new stadium or for some billionaire funded by regressive taxes on workers and homeowners, but building public housing for us with a bill paid for by the billionaires. And it was through that, going and talking to rank and file union members and having them organize in their unions and pressuring union leaders to support this, that we got a majority of local unions to endorse it, because it was either we created a thing that could not be ignored, right? But unfortunately, despite the endorsement of the local labor council and the majority of the local unions, the building trades leadership chose to effectively scab on our movement, running defense for Jeff Bezos and the Democrats backing him. My own union's leadership went so far as calling Amazon a, quote, responsible builder that doesn't have, quote, a requirement to pay a prevailing wage, but they do. This servile praise has aged horribly, with Amazon being slapped with fines for union busting, forcing workers to piss in bottles, trapping workers in a warehouse during a tornado, killing 6. Not to mention the testimony from Brother Idolo here from Cause. But it smacks of the majority of labor leaders' race to the bottom strategy of class collaboration, partnering with employers that's seen the conditions of workers, both union and non-union, plummet. And tragically, this bankrupt strategy has only been doubled down upon by the likes of Sean Fain and Sean O'Brien, who promised to change from the corrupt regimes leading UAW and the Teamsters, only to continue the policy of cowardice of their predecessors as they suck up to the Trump administration and champion the tariffs of, the America First. Sean Fain is supporting Trump's xenophobic tariffs on imported goods, while Sean O'Brien has gone so far as to speak in favor of right-to-work union busting, saying he'll collaborate with on union busting state by state. What may work for one doesn't work for the other. Who's to know? Yeah, fucking boo. Absolutely fucking shameful. And that... And that he was put forward, people have real confidence put in this guy that he was going to change things. And it's a shocking betrayal, and he should not be left off the hook by it. The left, the union activists cannot let these guys off the hook. So much like the building trades leader here ran cover for the Democrats and Jeff Bezos, O'Brien and Fain are doing the same for Elon Musk and the Republicans today. And this is a dead end. The political parties to the bosses do not offer a way forward for American workers, and we will be forced to pay the cost of these tariffs. The history of the labor movement is international. The counterpoint to this America First nonsense is, why are our international unions why weren't they organizing auto workers in Mexico when after the automakers got bailed out following the recession and said, man, we got all this money, we're going to throw it into developing factories in Mexico? Why didn't you go fucking organize them? Why are you instead saying, look at those guys, they're taking our jobs, they're driving down our wages? That's because you won't fucking organize them. Why do our union leaders pull punches so as not to challenge or embarrass the political establishment? Like working with Biden, as O'Brien did, to break the rail strike. Our tax Amazon fight worked in the exact opposite direction of that. We organized independently from the Democrats, rallying workers, young people, renters, union members to challenge and expose anyone who sided with big business through our action conferences and protests. We're not going to run cover for you while you betray working people. We're not going to subordinate working people's needs to your political career. And despite the quisling efforts of Democrats and labor fakers, we won attacks on Amazon and big business to the tune of over $200 million a year. And so that's, I think when it's like, how are we going to win things? I think that we have lessons here, we have experience here of fighting and winning. We have a track record. So I want to thank you all for showing up today, but it would be negligent to just leave it at that. Today is not enough. Everyone in this room has a job to do in the struggles ahead. Every single one of you, I'm looking at you with the shawl, you guy in the white shirt back there, every single fucking one of you, you fucking matter and you can do shit. Every single one of us needs to organize in our apartment buildings, workplaces, unions, communities for mass actions, including protests, occupations, and strikes. Obviously, we build up to those things, but we shouldn't be embarrassed about the strategy of our struggle. And I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be easy. Respect to Brother King, but there's no arc of a moral universe that bends toward justice. There is only class war, the outcome of which will be decided by whether or not regular people like us wage the necessary struggle to fight back. So I would appeal to everyone here to join Worker Strike Back if you're not already a member. Let's learn from our proud history of class struggle. And let's make full use of our being here in this room, and let's get organized today to fight for tomorrow. Solidarity.
Our next speaker is the leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, political theorist and strategist who's developed the theory of African internationalism. He's traveled to over 19 countries building black power struggles throughout Africa, Europe, and the Americas, and establishing solidarity relations with other colonized peoples' movements. He's driven the establishment of over 50 black community economic institutions across the United States designed to free African people from the colonial mode of production. Please welcome Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
I bring you greetings of Uhuru, which means freedom in Swahili. I am Omali Yeshitela, Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and leader of the Uhuru movement for worldwide African liberation and socialism. I began fighting the system of colonial capitalism in the 1960s. I'm still making that fight today, and we are closer than ever to winning total liberation for African and all oppressed peoples. I agree with the slogan of this conference that when we fight, we can win. We in the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement have been fighting, and we are winning. Nearly 3 years ago, Biden's FBI violently raided 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru movement in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Florida, including my home, with flak-jacketed soldiers, laser-guided rifles, tanks, flashbang grenades, and drones. They took our phones, our computers, and our files. 9 months later, Biden's DOJ indicted me, along with 2 leaders of our party's white solidarity and reparations component, on federal charges of being agents of Russia. The so-called overt acts charged in the indictment are all expressions of what is supposed to be protected free speech. Running candidates on a reparations platform, testifying at the United Nations reparations hearings, publishing articles in our newspaper, The Burning Spear, circulating a petition charging the United States government with genocide, speaking out against the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, exposing the fact that NATO expansion toward Russian territory provoked the war that has now taken millions of lives. They tried to lock me up for 15 years. We were offered a plea deal, but we chose to fight, and we built a popular campaign in the streets and through the independent media. We went to trial last September. The jury found us not guilty of being Russian agents, but guilty of conspiring to be Russian agents, conspiring to do something that didn't happen. We are appealing. In December, we were sentenced to 3 years probation. The judge said no prison time because everything in the indictment was protected free speech. The government knows that I don't work for Russia. They're upset because I don't work for them. I work for black people and the oppressed peoples of the world. I want to thank the many friends who are here today who supported us throughout the Uhuru 3's Fight Back campaign, including Jill Stein, who came to Tampa, Florida for the start of the trial and spoke in our defense on her campaign trail. So today we hear cries of panic and fears from many who say that fascism is coming. But the conditions they anticipate being imposed on the general population are conditions that African and indigenous people in America and colonized people around the world experience daily. We live in a country that was founded on the brutal kidnapping and enslavement of millions of African people and the genocidal war waged against the indigenous people to steal and settle their land. Worldwide capitalism was founded and continues to depend on the colonial exploitation of the peoples and resources inside of America and around the world. That system is in crisis because colonized peoples around the world are seizing this moment to recapture our human and material resources. That's why we see the global shift in the political and economic configuration of the world that is also impacting inside the United States. Today, there's an uneasy equilibrium between the dying forces of the colonial mode of production and the rising tide of anti-colonial socialism. While some see this moment as proto-fascist, we remember that the proto-fascism of the McCarthy era was disrupted by the anti-colonial struggle of the civil rights movement that kept the society open for everyone. We in the African People's Socialist Party are preparing to govern. At the same time as we are fighting for policy changes within the current system, through campaigns for community control of the police, opposition to gentrification, and freeing political prisoners like the just released Leonard Peltier, We are creating our own ability to feed, clothe, and house our people, negating the colonial mode of production that keeps us enslaved. As an example, in our headquarters in the black community in North St. Louis, we have acquired over a dozen dilapidated properties and built a community garden, a farmer's market, a workforce, housing for released prisoners, recreation facilities, and events venues. We have begun to work to build a women's health center and 2 bakery cafes in St. Petersburg, Florida. We operate an FM radio station, a food kitchen, an events venue, and publish our monthly newspaper, the Burning Spear. Indeed, when we fight, we can and do win. We look forward to working with you all and to build a world where everyone can enjoy peace, prosperity, and happiness, no one group at the expense of another. We are winning. Uhuru.
Thank you so much to Chairman Omali for sending that video of solidarity. I think showing the breadth and strength of this movement is a really important part of today, so we all leave feeling energized. And in that vein, we also have today with us Nick Cruz from the Revolutionary Blackout Network, which is a Black-led multicultural network of activists and citizen journalists focusing on empowering communities through education, organizing, and direct action. So go ahead and roll that for me, please.
What's poppin', my friends? Thank you for inviting me and allowing me to speak. It's unfortunate I wasn't able to make it. I had a lot of fun meeting you guys in Chicago and Seattle. I much prefer doing these in person. So I want to thank Kshama for giving me the opportunity to still record a video despite not making it in person. Right now, it's very important for us to stay active and stay mobilized because we are just witnessing another pendulum swing. It's inevitable that Donald Trump will disappoint MAGA. That's just a simple fact of the situation. The capitalist class will always portray the working class, and there will be a lot of poor and working class people who will be left behind in the MAGA economy. There are a lot of people who will see Donald Trump serving Israel in the military-industrial complex, and they will feel betrayed because they thought they was voting for someone who was anti-war. That's why it's extremely important for us as a working class movement, as socialists, as people who are class conscious, to be there for the working class as they are abandoned by the ruling class. And this time right now is very interesting because we have a lot of Democrats that are going through some things right now because they are realizing that neoliberalism and the Democratic Party is inept, and liberalism is not the ideology you need to defeat Donald Trump. You need a populist movement. So when they are down, as they are questioning their political party and they are panicking, we have to be there for them and pick up the people who are disillusioned by the Democratic Party and their incompetence. There was millions of voters. Remember, 80 million people did not vote for the two-party duopoly. There was millions of people who voted for Biden who didn't vote for him the second election because of the genocide in Gaza, which is another important point, which is why we actually provide a real option for the working class. We need to provide an anti-Zionist, pro-peace, left populist movement. And this is where the Democratic Party failed, by pointing out the hypocrisies of American First, by manipulating the differences between the MAGA woke right who believe in Zionist censorship versus the MAGA influencers who are similar to Candace Owens and their followers who are starting to question Zionism. As Donald Trump continued to serve Israel, we have to be there to pick up the people who realize that Donald Trump actually doesn't stand for American First. This is why it's extremely important for us to establish that we are hostile towards the empire, that our number one priority is to end the military-industrial complex and the corruption that destabilizes the lives of Americans. And the majority of the American people are with us because, as I mentioned before, 80 million Americans did not vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. And this is by design. The ruling class wants to disenfranchise well-informed, working-class people who want the best for their families. And there are many people in this country that wants to hold the billionaire class accountable, that want health care for their neighbors. 1 out of 3 Republicans support Medicare for all. The majority of independents, the majority of Democrats, the majority of people support ideas such as increasing the minimum wage, of ending the never-ending wars. But the ruling class distracts them with irrelevant culture war issues, which is used to distract the working class and convince poor white people to vote against their interests regarding the Republican Party. And many people who believe that the Democratic Party has the best interest for the LGBTQ community, they vote against their interests by voting for genocidal Zionist capitalists in the Democratic Party. So it's very crucial, and this is why I implore us to do. We have to completely reject the culture war and the liberal identity politics, which is used to distract the workers from anti-war populist movement, which is actually meant to challenge the capitalist class, which is our number one goal, because just reforming the modes of capitalism will not end the corruption and will not end the exploitation of our people. So it's very important for us to have an anti-war, anti-Zionist, socialist working class movement to challenge the working class. And something else that I want to strongly emphasize is our biggest push for electoralism should be via ballot initiatives. In the last election, when the American people, including the extremely deep red state of Missouri, decided to vote for Donald Trump, they also voted for an increase of the minimum wage. They voted for affordable housing. They voted for economic populism over and over again in Missouri. So whenever the American people have a chance to choose, they would choose things like a Medicaid expansion, like Missouri voted for. Now we have the Missouri governor who wants to override the will of the voters, because we live in an authoritarian hellscape where there's no way that the people can actually express their will on the government except via ballot initiatives, where we have to force their hand, like what is happening in Missouri. So if you don't have ballot initiatives, that should be your primary focus. And I am meaning a very small percent being spent on electoralism. We need to spend our time being there for our communities, organizing for the working class and the poor, standing in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, and advocating for an end of nuclear war. That should be our primary focus. I appreciate you guys for inviting me on, and I hope you guys are willing to work with us at Revolutionary Blackout as we continue to expand our mutual aid organization and mutual aid societies among the left. So thank you, Kshama and Workers Strike Back, for inviting me once again. Thank you guys, and have a great rest of your conference.
Thank you so much to Nick Cruz and RBN. I think, all these folks who had to send videos, also for me, really underscores the sacrifice that everyone who's here in person really made, because we know we don't take for granted the time, the energy, the resources to travel. So we appreciate people who are able to send these solidarity messages. We now have actually a hybrid contribution. So we've got one person in person and one video from Do Dissidents. I think maybe we could get Russell to come up here for when we're doing Keaton so that you can have it sort of side by side. You're probably used to that. But yeah, I think Do Dissidents, they weren't on my radar ahead of this election. And then they took a singly just incredible, strong position. They joined us out in Chicago at the DNC. And we've just been, fighting alongside ever since. And we're really proud to have them here. I think you're up first, and then we have Keaton's message. So yeah, welcome, Russell.
All right, this is going to be maybe not the best opening of a speech today, but it's definitely going to be the dorkiest opening that you're going to hear. The great science fiction writer Frank Herbert, told you, opens his masterpiece with the line, "A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct." Why are beginnings delicate? Because they are by their nature unmoored and rootless. Any small thing can destroy an effort at its beginning. whether a novel, a business, a resolution, or a political party. Any distraction, any conflict, any loss of momentum, and it can all evaporate very quickly. Add to that the reality that we must face from this beginning so that we do not, as Kshama might say, make illusions. The left is more broken on every level, from the cultural to the intellectual to the spiritual, than it has ever been in my lifetime, and arguably than it has ever been in this country. That is partly through self-inflicted wounds and partly a result of external pressure, sometimes exerted through the kind of infiltration and psychological operations that we now know for certain USAID, NED, the IRI, and many others have been running overseas for decades. It would be naive to think they haven't been running the same kinds of operations here at home. And when we look at the state of the left, we must offer some grudging admiration for the effectiveness of their efforts. We saw the end result of those efforts recently when the DNC offered content creators a cash bonanza by streaming their race for a new chair. The high comedy of this pure distillation of the essence of what the Democratic Party has been reduced to by its Wall Street owners working in tandem with an activist wing that is only allowed to exist precisely because it is ridiculous and ineffective at advocating even for the narrow identitarian issues that are the only issues allowed them by the party's donor class. It was as clear a lesson for activists as Ozymandias in the desert. This once great and powerful political party brought low and yet still there sticking up out of the sands of its own destruction to beg for money. Look on my work, ye mighty, and write a check. This was the final outcome of the Frankenstein's monster experiment of stitching together disparate elements of the civil rights movement, running them through a blender of tortured postmodernism, elevating obscure crackpot academics as spokespeople for the truly repulsive, zero-sum, all against all vision of society that came out the other side, and telling people this was what the left was all about. Not solidarity, identity. Not class, not the hard realities of material conditions. Instead, these ideas were replaced by a secular theology, with the villains often being the workers themselves, who hadn't been educated in the new jargon, and who not only didn't accept and embrace every new sexual and intellectual fetish of the ruling class, but often had the temerity to openly question them. As it turns out, polyamory is not a politics, and the hunt for microaggressions is no substitute for the hunt for better wages and free health care. And so the Democrats have not only fallen, hollowed out from the inside by the same narcissists and neurotics they let in to explain the purpose of their continued existence as a party after they sold out their old working class base. They have turned over the country to a re-energized Christian right that's going to end up making the Reagan Revolution look like Woodstock. This is where we are, and it should serve as a cautionary tale for any who are going to attempt to recover the lost power and reputation of the left. A political movement can survive hatred and hostility, but one thing it cannot survive is the perception that it is ridiculous. And by mistaking the need for tolerance with the need for indulgence, by confusing the mission of helping victims with the celebration of victimhood, by treating strength as a vice and incapacity as a virtue, not only the establishment left, but a good portion of the activist left has come to make itself look ridiculous. Any movement that indulges these ideas will end up being an enormous waste of time and money for all involved. The first person who wants to form a sub-caucus that has nothing to do with improving conditions for all workers should be, if not canceled and rejected, lest we become the same censorious prigs we condemn, given a firm talking to and a very clear and unambiguous refusal, so that the organization doesn't end up like the DNC or the DSA or countless other attempts at focusing the energies of the left, devoured from within by people whose only purpose is to divide and weaken. For a left that's gone 40 some odd years without a serious union presence in its councils or any real connection to laborers and tradesmen who may not think the way they do on every issue, repairing that relationship and reestablishing that connection is going to take a lot of humility and a serious course correction. This weekend, there is an opportunity to create a new vision that begins to repair the damage done by the Clinton ascendancy and the neoliberal politics it ushered in. We are fortunate to have so many talented people join in to help, including our many peers in the indie media space who have come together today to both appear on the live stream and to create a collective superstream of the event. And to lead the way forward, we couldn't have a better person than Kshama, who is that rarest of things in this foul year of our Lord 2025, a leftist that wins things. As one of our viewers recently said, Kshama is ride or die. She has won tangible victories for workers against the corrupt Democrats and the oligarchy they serve. Kshama has beaten the Leviathan that is Amazon, both imposing a local tax and the first $15 minimum wage in the country. And how did she do it? By inviting everyone into the tent, without elevating or denigrating any below or above the others. That is how you win over workers. That is how you build solidarity. That is how you create an alternative in waiting for the moment when the foot soldiers of the MAGA movement, who need to pay rent, see a doctor, take a plane, or collect Social Security like everybody else, come to realize that tech bro billionaires were never coming to save them, only to preside over their final destruction as a class and to dismantle what meager protections they had left from the greed of their own. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keaton Weiss from Do Dissidents. I'd have loved to have bought a plane ticket and flown out to be there in person, but for some reason my USAID check hasn't cleared this month. I called the Treasury Department to see what the issue could be, but no one answered. Instead, I got an automated message telling me that they're experiencing unusually high call volumes and that there were 328 white South African farmers ahead of me in the queue. So I never did get to the bottom of it, but in any event, it's a great pleasure to be able to address this conference. Back in May of 2021, during the brief but brutal to endure honeymoon period of the Biden administration, I struggled with how to, or even whether to, continue to engage politically. It was a very strange time when the country, coming out of the COVID lockdowns, seemed eerily content to settle back into the old pre-Trump way of doing things. Order had been restored, democracy had been rescued, of course, and normalcy had been reinstated. Lucky for me, though, despite having fallen into a pretty severe political depression, I had, months prior, committed to be a part of a telethon fundraiser for Kshama Sawant's effort against the Democrat-led recall in Seattle. And so in order to not break my commitments, I of course agreed to follow through and show up. And the evening of the fundraiser, I met Kshama and her team for the first time over a Zoom call in what was ultimately a 4 to 5 hour event. And for the first time, I saw what, if I'm being honest, I haven't really seen anywhere else at any moment since, which was a group of hardcore leftist activists who had their shit together, who could actually organize and win against the entrenched financial and political interests in Seattle. And win, they did. Kshama's team in Seattle pulled me back from the political brink. They kept me from falling into despair at a time when things seemed quite bleak. And today, of course, we find ourselves once again staring out at a political landscape that seems even more unforgiving than the one I just referenced, which is why I can think of no better place to be than here with many of that same team that so inspired me 4 years ago. Now, what makes these times even more difficult than before is that as the right wing amps up their assaults on ordinary people, the discredited liberal class has wrought enormous havoc by tarnishing the brand of noble left causes, tainting them in the minds of the working class. Environmentalism has been hijacked by uber-wealthy do-gooders who lecture the public from Davos, where they flew in on their gas-guzzling private jets. Anti-racism has been given a bad name by a cadre of PMC grifters like Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. The very concept of public health is now a controversial idea, thanks to the lies and mismanagement of a thoroughly corrupt for-profit medical system that destroyed what remained of its reputation these past 5 years since the pandemic struck. To be frank, liberal elites in and adjacent to the Democratic Party have failed at just about everything these past 8 years or so, except for one thing. They've succeeded in destroying the credibility of the American left by convincing the masses that we are one and the same. This is why the first and most urgent order of business for an emerging left movement is to make crystal clear in the mind of the public that we are not. In order to do this, we must remain laser focused on issues and causes that empower all working people of every race, color, and creed. Well, except for the white South African farmers. Fuck them. But everyone else should have a seat at the table, no matter who they voted for, how they identify, or, very importantly, I think, where they live. Workers from the East Coast to the West Coast, the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt, from the U.S.-Mexico border on down, in the Gaza Strip, and in the West Bank. All working people facing subjugation, from wage slavery to human trafficking to ethnic cleansing and genocide, are our class allies and must be treated as such, no matter the ruling class's efforts to divide us against each other. If we stick together, and in the words of our now dear leader, fight, 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 together, we will, like Kshama did before and has always done, in the end, win. So it's an honor to speak with you today. Thanks very much.
Our next speaker will be Hassan Abdel Salam, the co-founder of Abandon Biden, which then became the Abandon Harris movement. They challenged and turned away from the Democratic Party for their ongoing support of the genocide in Gaza. And ultimately, the Abandon Harris movement endorsed the anti-war campaign of Jill Stein and Butch Ware in 2024.
Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. A lone voice, relentless, again and again, calling for justice, piercing through the cold on Minnesota pavement, November 1st, 2023. We stood our ground, announced that we will never vote for the president. We came out in droves in 2020, and we made President Biden the President of the United States. We witnessed enough, the brutality, the bombardments, 3 weeks of genocide. Intolerable to the American conscience, we had no other choice. Our strategy to punish the president for his genocide, to send a signal to the political landscape that if you engage in genocide, you will lose the election. We persisted. People said, don't. The lesser of two evils. A ceasefire is coming. You're such a small population, people of conscience. You can't make a difference. The chorus of cynics, their voice never drowned our persistence. We walked and ran towards November 5th, holding hands, singing "We Shall Overcome." From Arizona to Georgia, from Georgia to Wisconsin, from Pennsylvania to Nevada, from North Carolina to Minnesota. We spoke out, persuaded our friends and our neighbors. We canvassed, we texted, we protested, and we won. Victory on November 5th, to resound through history, that we punished the vice president at the hands of people of conscience. The numbers and the data reveal that if the vice president, the president, did not commit genocide, likely Vice President Harris would have won. Our path continues. Our victory on November 5th emboldens us. A first chapter in a long story in the winding path of justice. We ask you to join us as we try to build a movement for all Americans to call for justice in our foreign policy. America has been pernicious in the name of its exceptionalism. Its maimed, destroyed, attacked, displaced, and murdered innocents. And here domestically at home, our inhumane policies, and abandon Biden, abandon Harris, we rebrand, reinvigorate, to galvanize a new movement, calling for Medicare for all, Medicare negotiating drug prices, ending homelessness, and ensuring a humane foreign policy worldwide. I will never forget Brother Faris, the real founder of Abandon Biden, in that prison where I was held by Israeli forces who detained and tortured me for weeks. in 2022 for no other reason than that we wished to protest peacefully. And there in prison, I met Brother Faris, one of the youth that I got to know that year. Him pacing before me back and forth in prison. He asked me that unforgettable question. What will you do if you go back home? If you go back to America? I never thought I'd go back. My interrogators promised me that I'd never be released. But I decided to answer, what will you do if you go back to America? I said I would speak out. And the most extraordinary thing happened on the face of Brother Faris. A huge, brilliant smile appeared. That what brought him pleasure is that you now would hear his story. That what brings the pleasure, the happiness on people oppressed worldwide, is the knowledge that together here, we would arrest the villainous atrocity and vices of our government, at home and abroad. And now, a new beginning. Let not the momentum dissipate. Join us in this movement with Workers Strike Back and the Green Party. Abandon Biden, abandon Harris. A movement for which we can say, finally, abandon genocide, abandon brutality, abandon injustice. Together, to bring a smile on Brother Faris's face and all those oppressed in our pursuit on this winding course towards justice.
Our final speaker for tonight, and will be providing our closing comments, is Willow Reeder. Willow is a public mental health worker in Boston, Massachusetts, and they are a member of Workers Strike Back and the Revolutionary Workers. And they are providing our closing remarks tonight. Thank you all for being here, and see you soon.
I'm Willow. I work as a therapist in a community mental health agency unionized with SEIU in the Boston area. I love the work that I do, and I love my clients, but I see firsthand every day the impact of this rotten capitalist system on mental health. And while many of my colleagues feel burnt out and demoralized by our extremely limited abilities to improve the lives of those that we serve, I am grateful for the clarity and hope provided through my membership in Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers. It's important and entirely necessary that we are here together as working people, union and non-union, as forces on the left, to discuss the way forward to build a united, militant, working class movement to fight the rich in both their parties. People are increasingly drawing the conclusion that both parties are for big business and the rich, that our needs are diametrically opposed to theirs, and that we cannot reform the Democratic Party. That Donald Trump, while he may have won some people over with his promises to bring down inflation and end the war on Gaza, is ultimately beholden to the rich and going on the offensive against workers and youth, and is calling for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is trying to suck his former supporters back into the fold of the billionaire-backed Democratic Party by talking about Medicare for all after having squandered every opportunity to fight for it. AOC and the squad try to pose as leaders of the resistance to Trump. Labor leaders are promising to work with the Trump administration rather than leading the charge against his anti-worker and right-wing agenda. We need to provide a clear alternative to overcome the divide and rule strategies of the ruling class. We need to build a new mass anti-war working class party, a party that includes Workers Strike Back, the Green Party, Abandon Harris, and other organizations. What's it going to take to build a new party for working people? And what kind of party do we need? We need a party that has a fighting strategy to win what workers need. Medicare for all, taxing Amazon and big business to fund social housing, free mass transit, ending all military funding for the Israeli state and the occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, unionizing Amazon in every workplace, and bringing down Trump, the billionaires, and both their parties. That is the program of our proposed Fight the Rich campaign. Free Palestine! Free Palestine. We need a party that has fighting leadership, with a track record of building effective movements, of taking on big business, taking on the Democratic and Republican parties, and winning. We won't win by just running a lot of candidates for office, and we don't have the capacity to do that. We need to concentrate our forces to wage effective class struggle campaigns, which could include running a few strong leaders in key elections. But a working class party has to do more than run elections. We need a party that will lead mass movements, militant protest action, mass civil disobedience, coordinated mass strikes to take on the power of big business. We need a party that will disrupt business as usual and use every tool at our disposal to win our demands. We shouldn't see this as launching just another third party to give more choices on the ballot during elections. We need to bring together the forces of the working class and the left to build the kind of mass party that can push aside the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the bosses, and ultimately their entire system. If you're watching online, become a member of Workers Strike Back right now. You can go to workerstrikeback.org/join and sign up to help build this fighting organization. Thank you all so much for being part of this movement. I hope to see all of you back tomorrow for our Workers Strike Back convention, where we'll hear more about work happening around the country, discuss the Fight the Rich campaign and our priorities, and vote on democratic structures and leadership to build Workers Strike Back into the strongest possible fighting force with chapters around the country. Real quick, who's our enemy? The rich. Who's our enemy? The rich. Thank you, in solidarity.